Let's look at our first example. So the first thing that I want to do is to write this in radical form. I have an n value or an index of 3 and I have an a value of negative 216. So I would write this in my radical form with a 3 as my index and a 216 or negative 216 as my a value under the radical. The next thing I want to do is determine how many roots that I'm going to have. My n value is 3, which is odd, so that means that I'm only going to have one real root. And now I need to figure out what that root is going to be. So let's go ahead and go over to the Desmos Scientific Calculator and I'll show you how to do that. Remember that you can get to the Desmos Scientific Calculator in two ways. One is to simply go to desmos.com and put /scientific. However, the other way is just to go to regular desmos.com and under the Math Tools, select Scientific Calculator. Once we're here, we want to go ahead and select the root that has the little floating n just like we have. So we're not going to select the square root key, we're going to select the one that has the floating n at the front. And once we do that, notice that we have a space to put our n value, and our n value is 3. And then go ahead and tab over to under the radical and put in your negative 216. And your answer is going to show up on the right-hand side. You can see that your answer is negative 6. So let's go back to our notes and report that number. All right, so Desmos told us that our one real root is equal to negative 6. And so you can check your answer by putting negative 6 times negative 6 times negative 6 into any calculator, and that's going to give you negative 216. So this is how you can check your work and see that you've done the right thing. Let's go ahead and look at our second example. We want the fourth root of 81. So again, we'll write this in our radical form of 4 as our n value and an 81 as our a value. Now let's go ahead and take note of the types of solutions we're expecting. We have a 4, which is even. And so when we're even, we look at whether the a value is greater than or less than 0, and our a is greater than 0, so that's going to lead us to having two real roots. We're going to have a positive and a negative. Now I'm going to caution you here that when you put this into Desmos, it's only going to give you the positive root. It's not going to tell you that there's also a negative one. We've got to remember that we have to have the positive and negative. So let's take a look. Again, we're going to select the radical symbol that has the floating n and put in a 4 this time with a positive 81 under the root. And as I mentioned, it's only going to tell you the positive number of 3. We have to know that when we're dealing with roots, we could have a positive or negative. And let me prove that to you back in our notes. All right, so the fourth root of 81 we found out from Desmos was 3, but we're smarter than Desmos and we know that it could be a positive or a negative 3. Let me show you why. If we do a check on this and we take 3 times 3 times 3 times 3, well, that's equal to, if we group these together, that's 9, and then times another 9, which is, of course, 81. However, look what happens when all of these are negatives. We have negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3 times negative 3. Well, when I group negative 3 and negative 3 together and multiply those, I also get a positive 9, and these are a positive 9 as well, giving me 81. So we have to account for both of those possibilities in our answer. Let's look at one final example. So in this example, our n value is 2 and our a value is negative 400. So if we were going to write this, we would say negative 400 underneath, and we could write the 2 here, although we don't typically write it when it's a 2. That's just a square root and the 2 is implied. So you could make yourself a note that we don't typically write this whenever it's a 2. Okay. However, let's look at our index here. We have an even index, but our a value is less than 0. It's a negative number. So that means that we have no real roots. So if we're only looking for real roots, we don't have any. If we're looking for overall what the roots are, we could take the negative out by popping an I out of the radical and then deal with the 400.